Welcome to the What's New in Collector for ArcGIS session. And there is a test, and you guys have passed the first question, which is, how do I find this San Jacinto room? So thank you for coming all this way down and joining us today. I'm here with Doug Morgenthaler next to me. He's the product owner for Collector, and today we're going to go through and talk about the current status of Collector for ArcGIS, show you a little bit about our latest release on the iOS platform, talk to you about what's coming next, and then we'll have some time left for question and answers. So, sounds good to everybody? All right, so we got to start with an introduction to Collector, and I'll be really brief. But before I do that, how many people here have used Collector for ArcGIS in their organization? Most everyone, good. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. I'll just briefly say that when we designed and built Collector, we built it upon a common principle, which is the web map, and bringing the web map to life out in the field so that a lot of organizations can start to capture data directly into the ArcGIS platform, and they can leverage the investment they've made in defining those layers that participate in a map, so that an app like Collector can be a wildfire damage assessment map or app, or it could be an asset inventory, like a hydrant inventory data collection app. And all of that is just customized by configuring the layers within the map. We've done a lot of work over the past few years to improve upon the way that you work with maps in the field, being able to seamlessly take them from the office out to the field and work with them in a disconnected environment or in a connected environment. And you'll see a few things in what Doug will show you today about some major improvements that happened in the last release of Collector to support that. We've also done a lot of work in integrating high quality GPS receivers, so you can ensure that when you're out in the field collecting data, that you're getting the best accuracy that you can. How many people that have used Collector are using it with external GPS receivers? A good chunk of you. How many are interested in that haven't yet done it? A few of you. Okay, we'll talk about some of that. The other key aspect to talk about with Collector and its positioning is that it's available today on 3 different platforms, iOS, Android, and Windows 10. We'll talk about some of the developments on Android and Windows 10 that are happening this year as well. And the way that Esri monetizes the Collector app is through its identity. And as you know, a lot has been changing over the last year as far as identity management goes within the ArcGIS Online platform. We talk about Collector as being a part of the field worker user type, and that's great if it's bundled together with apps like Workforce or Survey 123, because you're getting that added value, and it's actually at a reduced cost from what it used to be if you're looking at it from a monetary perspective. It's also important to point out that it's supported through the editor user type too. So even though we talk about it in the context of the field worker, if you purchase an editor user type, you can leverage a Collector through that as well. Okay, so let's talk about the current status. Collector, and I'm not just kind of tooting our own horn on it, the numbers show that it's the most successful field application that we have within the platform. On the Apple platform, we've had over 1 million downloads. On the Android platform, around 500,000 downloads. And the Windows platform isn't anywhere close to that, but it's starting to catch up. But Collector started by building on top of the ArcGIS runtime. And we released the first version about 5 years ago. And over the past 2 years, as the runtime has evolved, Collector is evolving, both in that underlying architecture by using the latest versions of the runtime, but also in user experience as well. We released a brand new version of Collector in December on the iOS platform. And when we did that, we took the existing version of Collector and we renamed it to Collector Classic so that both applications could live side by side on your device, and you could start to transition your field workforce from the old to the new when it made sense for you to do so. And we've been in beta of this new Collector experience on the Android platform for a little while, and we've got some exciting new updates that are going to come out in beta format in about a month time frame, if not less. As I mentioned already, Collector is supported on the Windows 10 platform, and we've had a lot of success with it on that platform. We're about to engage and start to build the new experience for Collector on Windows 10, the Windows 10 platform in the second half of this year. So that's kind of the current status. I did want to talk a little bit about the classic version first before we move on, because there's some things that are interesting there that you may or may not have known about. I did mention already that Collector Classic can live side by side with the new version that we've released on iOS and Android, or on the iOS platform. One of the things you'll need to think about is, when do I bring my field workforce onto that new version? So if you're integrating Collector with other applications like Workforce or Survey or Explorer, the concept of integration is through what we call a URL scheme. And we're going to show that to you a little bit later in the session. With that URL scheme, you need to think about what app is actually getting called. And if you deploy both versions side by side on the device, sometimes it can get confused as to what app it's calling. So just keep that in mind. I think as you're migrating, you're going to want to test on your side first with the new Collector, and then think about just one of the apps on the device for your field workers at any point in time. But I wanted to expand on that URL scheme and talk about what you can do with it. So has anyone used the URL scheme? A few of you have. I'm going to talk about one of our partner integrations, and this is probably going to upset the other partners that are in the room. We're always in trouble with these partners, but it's pretty interesting what they've actually done. This is specifically a company named EOS Positioning, and they reached in to the experience with the URL scheme and extended Collector's behavior to tap into new and exciting different workflows. They've added new construction methods. You can see the list of them there. And let me give you the example that was given to us when we talked to them about it. They have a customer. Their customer's name is American Water. With American Water, they have to go out and capture the locations of assets in the field. Those assets need to be mapped at a high accuracy. But they have a challenge. Some of these assets are in locations that are hard to get to and are very costly to spend time in occupying and getting GPS positions. For example, if they want to capture the location of a manhole that's in the middle of a street intersection, to do that without what EOS has done here, they have to first work with the city to find a time in which they could shut down the street and then go out and capture their data. Very costly, from both a time and money's perspective. With this integration, they could then rather stand on the corner of the street with an antenna up on the pole, a laser rangefinder, get the accurate position of a corner, shoot the position of the manhole, move to another corner, shoot the position of the manhole, and get that accurate manhole location without having to shut down the street at all. So just by using the URL scheme and being able to pass information from Collector out to the partner application back to Collector, you can add exciting new workflows just like that. And this actually became an offering, not just with them, but with another partner named Laser Technology as well. If some of you have used their rangefinders. All right, so we wanted to jump in and talk right away about the new version of Collector that we released back at the end of the year, and that version was called 18.1. You might have noticed just today we released a new version. So this slide's already out of date. It's version 1901 now, and it's available in the store. And we can talk a little bit about that. But this is the first update on the new runtime that has this new user experience to it. And there were quite a few different things we addressed in this update. Perhaps one of the biggest requirements was actually being able to label on the map. So we've improved the mapping capabilities. It supports labels with arcade expressions. We've overhauled the user experience, not only for just working within the map or maps, but also in the overall collect experience as well. We've added a whole bunch of new capabilities with offline, as well as some new tools. And instead of hearing me just talk about it, let's pass it over to Doug, and Doug can show you some of the new features that we've added.
All right, so the first thing I want to talk about a little bit is some of the new capabilities that Collector takes advantage of that are actually derived from your WebGIS. So what we're going to talk about now is the concept of how do you work offline. Obviously, Collector for many years has supported the ability to work offline in what we call an on-demand mode, which means that the person who's going out in the field defines for a given map, defines the area, defines the level of detail of the base map, and then they go and do that, download that, and they can work offline. With the recent release of Collector, we now support what we call pre-planned offline workflows. And really, as it says, the intention here is really to have folks in the office, a little finicky, folks in the office define what those areas are, which simplifies those field workers' lives because they don't have to make those decisions. So I'm going to walk through quickly how you go about configuring pre-planned offline areas, and then we'll take a look in Collector to see how that comes to life. So here I am, I'm in my web map. In this case, I'm in ArcGIS Online. And I'm going to go to the settings for my web map. And then I have the offline section here. Now, we know that there are some prerequisites for taking a map and working with it offline in Collector. Those haven't changed. So I need all of my feature layers that I have in my web map have to be sync enabled. All of my base map or tiled services, be they vector tiles or raster tiles, need to support export. If that's the case, then I can configure my map for offline use. I don't have to, of course, but I can. So we've supported for quite some time the ability to control what type of information is exchanged. Obviously, information that's coming from the field, you always want to send back that the mobile worker is collecting or updating. But there are cases where there's a lot of information, particularly thinking about attachments, where you don't necessarily need to see those for an inspection workflow once you've already done the asset inventory. You don't need to see those particular attachments. You just want to collect information. So these are some ways that you can optimize the information that you download to the device when you're taking the map offline. Okay, so in this case, we also have this new map areas section here. These offline map areas are what support our pre-planned offline workflows. Didn't even touch them. Okay. So when I tap on Manage Areas here, what it's going to do, I've already got a few areas already configured for this particular map. The great thing here is that as an administrator, I often know where my field workers need to work and what areas they'll be working for a while. So rather than each field worker making these decisions, I can simply make that decision myself. So I'll go ahead and create a new map area. So I'll give it a name. Again, West. Let's go with West. And then I need to define the area. So here, if I zoom in a little bit, I can get. I'm just going to take the west half of Naperville here. So a couple of advantages immediately. One, I don't have to use a square. Sometimes that's, I might have an area that needs an irregular rectangle. I can do that to maximize the efficiency of the data I'm taking off. Second, I can define the base map's level of detail here, so I can say I might need streets. And then there's this updating packages. So on a regular schedule that you can configure, you can control when this package gets updated. Now, people that are working offline will always be able to access the most recent and have the current version. This is just kind of minimizing the amount of data they have to download initially. Okay, so once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And it's going to go ahead and start creating that map area. And you'll see here that it says it's packaging. So what is it doing in this case? So it's going and it's starting to extract all that data. So it's taking all those operational layers that support sync that are in my web map. It's extracting those into a SQLite geodatabase, a mobile geodatabase. And it's also taking any of those tile layers, including my base map layers, and extracting those. We just take a quick look here at one of the areas we've already got defined. You'll see that I have a geodatabase here, and then I have a vector tile service, that vector tile package. So this is what, when you get to collected, this is the information that you're going to download. So you may have one or more of these as part of your map. So again, just a much easier way for people to, in the office, to define those offline areas to simplify the field workflows. Okay, so now we're going to take a quick switch over here onto the mobile device. All right. I know that's probably really hard for you guys to see. I'll try and talk this through as much as I can. But basically, here I have a list of web maps, of course. And those web maps, of course, are the same web maps that you are already using today. No change there. The difference here is if you can read that, you probably can't. It says, for this particular map, it says there's offline areas available. So what that means is that when I tap on this map, I get a list of pre-planned map areas that I can take offline. So you'll see that I have a few here that are already present. So I have one that I've already downloaded. I can download as many of these as I need to. So that's one improvement over the current classic. The classic version is I can take as many of these offline. But obviously from an ease of use perspective, mobile worker just needs to know which area am I working in, that you've named it hopefully appropriately, and just tap on it and immediately download. It's thinking about your latest show from Netflix that you want to watch on the plane, kind of the same notion. So very simple. So once you've downloaded an offline area, you can of course open that map area. Now there's a few things that I'll point out just in terms of the overall user experience and capabilities in Collector today that are new. One is support for vector-based maps. So if you use vector tiles, you know they're performant for large areas. They can be much, much, much smaller, which means that you can take a lot more data offline with your base map. It's very performant. You also, now we've added a lot of support for better mapping. So things like advanced symbology, labeling, which I know has always been a big ask for many of you. So I can label those features here. You can see that I have a valve that's labeled, so I don't have to tap on that to get that information. All I need to do is see it up there on the map. We've also spent a lot of time trying to optimize the overall user experience for the workflows that you do in Collector, be that asset inventory or be that doing inspections. So first thing what we're going to do here is we're going to tap on this meter, and you'll see that I can view both the map and the panel and the information itself for that particular feature. And if I can slide that up and look, focus all of my limited real estate. I'm obviously on a phone. They're getting larger, but there's still always challenges. So I can take and put my focus on the information for that feature. I can look at it and get both a map and content and information view, or I can slide that down and just really focus on the map. So much more efficient. And this is a pattern that you'll see throughout many of our apps, including Explorer, Workforce, and the like. Okay, so we're going to do a quick collection here, and I'm going to start collecting from this meter. And I'm going to collect a plastic pipe. And then I'm going to define the geometry. I'm going to use my current location to set the other point there. And then I need to enter some information. So I'm going to set the installation date to today, installation method, the trench, no warning tape, no tracer wire. And then there's, this last field is a barcode. So we've been working hard to try and optimize the input that you use for asset inventory, right? So, or even inspections. So here I've got a barcode that I'm going to scan from phone to phone just because I have both of those available. But you can imagine this being tied to this asset. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I certainly don't know what that barcode is telling me. Now, the interesting thing about this particular barcode is the gas industry for all plastic pipe and fittings has a specific standard that relies on a specific encoding of a barcode, and it contains a lot of information. So, a couple of things. Once I go ahead and submit this, of course, I'm working offline here, so this is being stored in my device. And when I look now at the feature, you'll see that I've got a label. It's giving me a 1-inch coiled pipe. Well, where's that coiled pipe information coming from? It's coming from that barcode, along with a whole lot of other information here. So you can see that for this particular component, I can see what the manufacturer is. I can see what the lot number is, what its production date is, and what's the component type. So that's how that's being done. Well, how is that barcode being decoded? Especially I'm offline. That's being done all through arcade expressions. So how many of you are already using arcade? The rest of you should be using arcade. So arcade is a really powerful cross-platform language that works across mobile applications like Collector, but also web applications, drives a lot of the smart mapping work that we've been doing. Really highly encourage using that. But anyway, so in this case, we're capturing all of that information, and that's immediately available to the person out in the field so they can verify, is this really what I'm capturing? Obviously also available to everyone else in the office because it's just stored as part of your web maps pop-up. Okay, so again, we've been working offline. One of the things that we've been focusing on, of course, working offline, there's a point at which you have to start sending that data that you've been collecting back to the office. And that might be throughout the day when you have connectivity, or it might be just at night. We've optimized this to support being able to sync directly from within the map that you're working. So if you're working all day, you can simply tap on this, and here you'll see that I have a local edit down at the bottom, so I can review all of my edits that I've made throughout the day since my last sync. So I can view that, I can update that if I need to before I actually send that back to the office. And of course, I can just tap sync here and it will work great. However, a lot of times, as a field worker, I'm not thinking about syncing. I'm thinking about driving to my next work order, whatever the case may be. So we've added support for auto sync. And auto sync is really designed to let the field worker, while they're working, let Collector figure out, hey, I have connectivity. I'm going to try and send this data back up. Requires no interaction from the mobile worker, but that means the data is getting back in the office quicker, which means you as administrators could get better decisions from them. So this works on an interval. You can configure this by default, it's 15 minutes. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and sync that myself. And once that data, of course, is up, then that will be available to the rest of the organization. So that's a quick overview of Collector as a whole, but also really thinking about how you can take some of your offline workflows and move those to pre-planned offline rather than on-demand scenario. Yep.
Cool. Thanks, Doug. So this is just a laundry list of a lot of the new features that are in Collector. with this update. Doug hit on a number of them, but there's quite a few additional ones on top of that. I wanted to highlight a few of the favorite ones that of mine that are in yellow here. Doug mentioned vector base map support. Proper support for required fields is actually in this version as well. In the user experience for collection, it's really easy now to take a photo. Used to be a lot of taps before in order to do that. The auto sync capabilities you just saw. Something that's really cool if you're, especially if you're working for a utility or doing public works type of stuff where you need to get to the location of a buried asset, is compass navigation. So if I marry collector with that external GPS receiver and I get my accuracy sub-foot, I can navigate to the location of the asset down to the centimeter level, ultimately, using the compass navigation. We added audio recording capability. Not only can that barcode be used in updating the feature attributes, but you can search with the barcode. So if you're close to an asset, but you're not sure, in this cluster of assets, which one is the one you should be updating, and it's got a barcode, you can scan the barcode and it selects that feature for you. Obviously, the arcade expressions are a pretty big deal. They are throughout the whole platform, and you should be taking advantage of them. And then a big thing for us with high accuracy is that we actually support z-values directly inside of the geometry today. And through the work we've been doing with EOS, they actually have downloaded, to help us in the shorter term, they can download an accurate geoid model like NavD88 if you're in the US. And so what gets pumped directly into the geometry is the true orthometric height rather than the height above ellipsoid, which is really cool. We've been talking to the other vendors about doing the same. Eventually, we'll have support for vertical transformations, and that won't be as big of a deal, but where possible, we want to be able to take advantage of that now that we can store z-values directly inside of the geometry. One of the other things we did with Trimble, if you're using Trimble receivers and you are connecting to some kind of VRS network or RTK network, we've included the N-trip settings directly inside of collectors, so you don't have to bounce out to another application to set that all up and bring it back in. Okay, I wanted to just quickly touch on some of those other things that Doug was talking about in preparing maps, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that is really valuable that's come through the platform that's important to collector. As you know, we've got a number of collector templates that help jumpstart your use of ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise and getting started with field work. One that came into the last release of ArcGIS Online, not the last release, 2 releases ago, that's coming into the 10.7 version of ArcGIS Enterprise, is the ability to kind of create layers from scratch. So there's simple templates for point, line, polygon, feature layers that you can add. And they also included the ability for you to add fields, add what they call lists, which are domains for fields, including range domains. So you can build a very intelligent data model without having to jump out to ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. It doesn't include related tables yet, but I think outside of that, it's pretty inclusive of what you can do inside of Pro. Not that you don't necessarily want to use Pro. There's a lot of advantages of using Pro, but it lowers the bar so that you can focus your time on those more important things you need to do, and you can move towards a self-service mapping approach within your organization. Jug showed you the pre-planned maps capability. One of the things I wanted to mention, it kind of snuck in to the last release of ArcGIS Online, was the use in collector web map setting. So as you probably know, whenever you make a web map and that web map includes an editable feature layer inside of it, it's available for use in collector. Well, what if you don't actually want to use it in collector? Well, what happens when the web map is saved is it writes this keyword into the JSON of the web map that collector is aware of and picks up. Well, now in the item details of the web map, you can just remove that keyword by disabling the use in collector setting. Another really handy tool if you're using hosted feature layers is the append tool. So the append tool in ArcGIS Online lets you just load content. Maybe it's data that's come from a spreadsheet or a KML file or a shape file. You can load that in. But what happens when that data gets updated? Well, they added the ability with the append tool to support update and do that in the context of the feature layer being sync enabled. So you can use that to keep loading content into your map that then you can take to the field and validate or update using collector if you want. Last thing I wanted to mention was feature layer views. Are you all familiar with feature layer views? Just like Arcade, you really need to learn about feature layer views because it's extremely powerful. You can define multiple views against the feature layer and control the editing behavior, which is an amazing thing when you start to think about it, right? So if I have a group that I only want to be able to support updating the asset information and maybe doing inspection workflows, and another group that I want to go out and capture the location of assets, I can use views to do that, and it all comes back into the same layer, which is extremely powerful. You don't have to worry about replicating data sources. So feature layer views can be your friend. We've been working a lot on additional resources. I keep asking all these questions. I bugged Glenn Leatham over Twitter here already that I was going to quiz him. Where are you, Glenn? I want to raise your hand up. Did he leave already? No, he's here. Glenn, have you heard of learn.arcgis.com before? He has. Okay, good. Good answer. Prompted you with that one a little bit. But within the Learn site, we've been working on a number of articles that are how-tos that jumpstart your use of collector. From the first best experience to how to create maps, and we're going to continue to expand that, and we're working with our solutions team on writing those as well, so they can be very industry specific. You can point your folks at them and really get them started on collector by using those Learn lessons. So I encourage you to look at that. Okay, I don't know if Doug's ready yet or not, but I'm going to pass it to him. One of the things that we're going to do now is we're going to show you some of the great new features that are going to come next in collector. We've got a short-term plan on stuff. We're going to talk about that. And we've got some research and development work that we're doing as well. Maybe before we do that, as Doug was just getting ready, I can give you a bit of status on Android and Windows. So what you saw and we just talked about is wonderful on the iOS platform. It's out there, it's released. What about Android? Why you guys always only talking about iOS? We hear that once in a while. Well, we're busy in development on the Android platform as well. And we're trying to close the gap. And we're trying to do that as quick as we can. We've got a beta out there that's in Google Play today. And if you go and email collector4arcgis@esri.com, or if you email collectorbeta@esri.com, Doug and myself and other members of the team get your emails. Glenn, don't go and harass us with nasty emails. But what you can do is request access to the beta, and we'll get you in through Google Play so that you can start to use the Android version, and you can follow along with us as we move toward releasing the Android version as we start into our development on the new Windows 10 version. So please join that if you're interested in those platforms. And we've got a big beta update that's going to come. We also do holistic testing, and that holistic testing you can do remotely. So you can join us for a day. You can be in your office. We prefer that you spend a bit of time in the field because that's where collector works best. And you can use daily builds of collector and give us feedback as we move along. And we've got one that's coming up really quick. So please reach out to us on that. All right, so with that, Doug, I want to pass it back to you to show some of the new features that are going to be coming.
All right. So thanks, Jeff. So we're going to take a look at a few things that are coming in the relatively short term with Collector. There are some of the things that I'm going to point out, I will point out that you can do today, but you may not be using, maybe things you're not aware of or haven't taken advantage of. So there's a couple of things here. So this particular map is a connected map, and it's of water wells here in the Coachella Valley. One of the things that, of course, if you're doing an inspection or you're trying to locate a particular asset, you can configure your web map, and Collector honors this to support searching your features, searching for your assets by an ID, what have you. So here I've got a previous search that I've already run, and you can see that not only do I get some places, some addresses and whatnot, but I also get one of my wells back. So here I've got a well that I had, I believe I previously inspected, and I needed to do an update of the information for that particular inspection. Now, I know it was near 111, Highway 111, but I'm not 100% certain that this is the well that I need to update. So one of the things that we've had in current versions of Collector and Collector Classic on iOS is location tracking. So where have I been? So one of the things that you can use now with Collector is, if you're running on an iPad, is running apps here side by side. So if I say here for the last 72 hours, where have I been?
Downtown.
We'll see if I've been on the bars, well, who knows. So you can see that I did do some work here on, traveled 111. And I know that this particular, see Angel Canyon Trail. Okay, well I can maybe find that here on within Tracker, which has been tracking my location while I've been working. Now that's great, and I of course can have these two apps side by side. But wouldn't it be better if this is all wrapped in one? So I'm going to just slide Tracker out of the way here, and I'm going to go to my Layers tool here in Collector. And you'll see that I have the ability to turn on my tracks layer directly within Collector. So you can see here now I can see the direction of travel. I can also get information about where I've actually been and what time I was there. So let's see, okay, so it looks like I was there around 11:30 or so on the 4th of March. So that was Monday. So I know that's the area that I need to be looking. So if I go back to my well here, you'll see that a couple of things. One, you'll see information about my well, but you may notice these grouped sets of information. So obviously we're always limited by screen real estate. Sometimes our forms can be really long. It's really nice to be able to organize those in a meaningful way. So here within my web map, and they showed this a little bit in the plenary through the JavaScript API, I can group those values so that I can simply collapse that information if I want to minimize that portion of the form, focus on something else, obviously tap again to expand. So just a really easy way to sort of control the information that I have to see at a given point, especially for larger forms. Okay, so you'll also notice here that I've got a series of related tables. So these are the tables that I'm using to do my inspections. So I did a chemical analysis inspection on this particular well, and you'll notice that I have two inspections. One was at 11:39, which corresponds to that location that I had from Tracker, from my track. So I know I've got the right well. I know I'm doing the right inspection. Now, what you're seeing here is a list of all the chemical analysis that was performed on this particular well. Not only the particular attribute or element that was being tracked, its value, but I don't know about you guys, maybe there are people that really do know what all of these thresholds are. I do not. So we've used Arcade to basically build a really simple visual cue to see, is that within the threshold, acceptable threshold for a water well, or is that outside the threshold? So you'll see here that most of them are green. That's great. pH is a little high. So that was actually the value that I needed to update based on information that from a secondary analysis. And again, just like we looked at with the information for the well, each of my chemical analysis also has this ability to collapse or expand these. So these are sort of organized by types of tests and measurements that would be done. So here I'm going to go ahead and update the physical case. So and it may be a little difficult to see, but all of these are required fields. So whenever I do an inspection, I need to go ahead and update and enter all of this information. So I know that when that field inspection is done, all of the information that I'm requiring folks to capture is being captured. So in this case, this really was not, it was actually 8.3 versus 8.6. And again, I can go ahead and finish and submit that. And once that's submitted, you'll see that my overview now updates, and you can see that that actually falls within the acceptable threshold. So again, just another use of Arcade. And this particular aspect is something you can do today. Arcade supports this right now. You can use this in Collector today. But that's just an overview of some of the capabilities that we're planning to bring in the relatively near term to Collector. And Jeff will talk a little bit more about what's coming down the road.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Yeah, so Doug showed you location tracking. If you weren't aware of what we're doing there, we've got a new app that's coming out at the end of March called Tracker for ArcGIS. It's tied to ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7 in the March timeframe, and then we'll support ArcGIS Online in the summer timeframe. And all it does is collect and share tracks with your organization. And we've actually got a session later this afternoon within Workforce. We're going to talk a lot about a tracker as part of that discussion. So location tracking is a new capability, and Collector will support that pretty soon. The URL integration work is something else that we're doing, and I'll talk about this in a little bit of detail. One of the areas that is just a very simple thing we've done, how many here are using ArcGIS Enterprise with Collector? So probably the biggest challenge with getting users up and running with ArcGIS Enterprise and Collector is that they have to type in that bloody URL to the portal, right? And then they got to get that right, and then they can enter their username and password. Well, we're adding to the URL scheme the portal URL as a parameter. So you could actually just create a QR code, have them point at the QR code, and it will automatically fill out the portal URL for them and take them directly to the username password sign-in page, which will help you in troubleshooting why they can't sign in. In our integrations with Collector and Workforce, we supported the workflow where you could remotely launch Collector and capture a new location. But that doesn't help you if you're doing an asset inspection type of workflow. What you want to be able to do is remotely launch Collector, pass with it some unique identifier for the feature, and get to the point where you could create a new related record. And so that's ultimately supporting our inspection workflows and our update of existing data workflows. And so we're adding that capability into the URL scheme. And we're trying to expand the partner opportunities like we talked about earlier with the classic version and the work we did with EOS to do that with the new version of Collector so that our partner community can greatly expand on what we've done. And we've talked to a number of partners about doing some exciting new things with the URL scheme. We just released and added the side-by-side support. You saw that. And our other applications are coming up to speed with the side-by-side. You saw Tracker, Explorer supports it today. When we do the next release of Workforce, when we do the next release of Navigator, those will start to support it as well. So Esri apps will work side by side, and we're trying to get our partner apps to support it. One of them that does already is Bad Elf, so you can run Bad Elf side by side with Collector on that iPad, and then you get all the richness of the Bad Elf user experience alongside your Collector experience, which can be pretty interesting. In the pre-planned offline areas, they're going to support polygon shapes, not just rectangles, but polygon shapes. What release is that coming?
It'll be either June or September.
Okay, so once that's inside, we can support taking these irregular shapes offline. And there is a base map by reference setting that's inside of the web map today. So you can say, I've already got a side-loaded base map on my device. Just reference that. Don't make me download the base map that's in the web map. And that's coming. I'm getting old. I'm forgetting all these things.
Well, now that this release is out, it's the next release.
It's our next release
Q2.
of Collector. Yeah. And this chunk of work we're thinking is going to be around Q2. So it's our next piece of work that we're adding to Collector. And then the things that are coming after that. Well, Doug started to show you some of the smart form capabilities with grouping. And if you watch the plenary of the Dev Summit, you saw some of the smart form capabilities through the JavaScript API, and that included conditional logic, right? And as part of that work, it's getting fed into the web map specification. And so what Doug was showing you was reading directly out of a web map. And not only does Collector benefit from that, and not only do web apps benefit from that, so does ArcGIS Pro. And then this is some of the additional features that are high in our backlog, adding support for signatures, adding attachments in line in the form is part of that smart form, supporting snapping, which is a big request we hear a lot, being able to lasso a bunch of features and bulk update all of the feature attributes for all those features at once, moving into a draft mode. So maybe I want to partially collect a feature and then I'm done for the day and I need to go back and collect the rest of it. That's been asked for a lot and we've been looking at that. And then repetitive values, so being able to stamp onto existing features attributes that were collected from a feature before. It's just one example. We don't have a schedule tied to this. Again, like I was saying earlier with the beta programs, as we start to build and add support, we really want your feedback as we go along. And that could be through the official betas, that can be through our holistic testing efforts that we do, and emailing collectorbeta@esri.com is the best way to get connected with us on that. On the app integration, I mean, this is the kind of stuff you can do today. Like the URL scheme is there for this new version of Collector. We're just adding much more to it as we move forward. These are kind of the standard things you can do if you want today, right? I can integrate Collector and Workforce or Navigator or Survey123 or, you know, my custom application. We've got some partners that are integrating with Collector as well. And we want to do much more. We've talked about with the portal URL, with actually having a callback parameter. So once you're done submitting a feature, have it return back to the calling application that launched it. And even doing search through the URL parameter. So what we have today is all documented. It's on this GitHub repo that you can look at now. And like I said, we're expanding on it greatly this year. And we want to hear back from you on the additional things that you're looking for with that app integration scheme. With that, I mean, that's all we've got to show you today. And I think we have a few minutes left that we can open it up to questions. Yes?
Yeah, this might be, I have two questions with this talk. The first one might be answered by the use of ArcGIS. So I work for USGS, and geologists in the field like to be able to see their recordings of strike and dip instantaneously on the screen. So when you talk about
I'll try to paraphrase that question. Geologists often use, or they're out in the field calculating, and I believe this is through exploration primarily in the workflow, strike and dip information. And the ask is whether or not you could model strike and dip through arcade expressions. That's a really good question. I think part of the, I'm not a geologist. I don't even try to pretend to be one on TV, though I do work with our natural resources team a lot. But I think part of that you need is an angular measurement, right? So if you can manually calculate that and then represent it.
They do that, and then they would type it in.
Okay.
Two separate fields, but the symbol itself is one symbol with a line pointing one direction and another line 90 degrees off. So being able to control the angular direction of those two segments of the symbol.
Oof. I have no idea about the symbology aspect of that. We might need to talk to the pro team about how to create that level of symbology, so we could follow up with you on that afterwards. It's really interesting. I did have one petroleum customer ask me about doing strike and dip, but they wanted to use the accelerometer and just put the phone down at an angle and be able to calculate. I don't know if that's the strike or the dip, but one of those two.
And then my follow-up question to that is, given the nature of what we do when we're in offline environments, you guys mentioned the capability of having an auto sync, but sometimes our geologists go into periods where they might have signal for 4 bars for 5 seconds. So I'm curious to understand how the system thinks when it says, oh, I have signal, and then it starts to send, and it says, oh wait, I don't have signal anymore. And what that can do to the data set on the device, whereas it tries to push but then it fails.
Right, so the question was, in cases where you're working offline, you may temporarily get a bit of connectivity. How does AutoSync work in that case, and is there any effects of then immediately losing signal while you're doing sync? Basically, AutoSync is really no different than sync today in terms of what it does. So it will try to send data, and if that data upload fails because you've lost connectivity, it will fail. We'll just leave the data set as is, no changes. In the case of AutoSync, obviously when you're manually performing a sync, you want feedback because you've initiated that. So as a user, I want to know that failed. So we will tell you either in the map screen or within the map, if you tap on sync, we'll tell you that it failed. But in the case of AutoSync, we silently we'll try again. So if we hit our 15-minute timer, we check, see if you have connectivity. If you do, great, we will start sending data. If we then lose it, it'll behave just like the manual sync does. It will stop, try it again.
But we can control whether AutoSync is enabled or not.
Correct, yes. So the question was, can you control whether AutoSync is enabled? And yes, that is something that you can control.
You want to take the next one?
Yeah.
I think you mentioned this with the compass parts you talked about, but I want to ask a little more in depth. So some of what we do is we often have set points out in the field they're easy to navigate to, but sometimes we say, all right, we need to go put a new point here in the middle of nowhere. We want it to be random. We don't want them to cherry pick a great spot, so they just put a point on the map and then navigate to that point. And old collectors is kind of like walking toward it, watching your current location, watching where the point is, and trying not to get too far off. Does that new compass feature help point you in the right direction so you can walk more of a straight line?
Yeah.
Right. So the question is if you're trying to actually set a point and then navigate to that with straight line distance, does Collector now give you a better feedback about which direction am I supposed to go? And the answer is yes. So when you go into compass navigation mode, we will actually rotate the map and give you a visual graphic, but also a bearing and a distance. So you'll know, hey, if I need to head northeast for 600 meters or wherever the case is. And of course, if you're tying this together with a high accuracy receiver, if you're looking for a buried asset or something like that, you can really get very, very accurate positions and make that compass navigation even more efficient.
We just ask that you keep your head up as you're walking. Yeah, we go for the back one first.
You have some examples of iOS apps that also support offline modes on your GitHub. Can you speak to the difference in the caching mechanism how much is special magic that exists only in the collector code?
Oh,
That's a good question.
that's a really good question. And an interesting one to paraphrase, but we're trying to paraphrase these for the audio recording. So ultimately, if I get the question right, it's can you explain with the Esri apps how does the offline functionality work, and how much of that is coming from the runtime versus a logic that lives inside of the collector application? Is that a fair way to summarize it? Yeah, so today we have the following apps that support offline use: Collector, Navigator, and Explorer. And Survey 123 also supports offline use. Now, within Collector, we're using the iOS Runtime SDK to generate the offline map. With the methods that are used inside of our application, neither of us are the developers of the application, so we'll need to get you in contact with the developers that write that code. But we're using the Runtime SDK to generate the mobile map that's used and downloaded to the device, the same as you as an iOS developer would do. We've just created the UI on top that lets you define the area that you want to take offline for the on-demand experience. That's I think, number one. That's specific to Collector. Now, Explorer in its released version today supports read-only maps that are working offline. And the experience that's in the released version today requires that you use ArcGIS Pro, and you create what's called a mobile map package. And that mobile map package can be either side-loaded directly to your mobile device, or it can be uploaded into your portal or ArcGIS Online and shared in a group that field worker can download and use. And that is a .mmPK format. That's what's supported today inside of actually both Explorer and Navigator. Explorer, if you happen to attend one of the sessions today on Explorer, is adding into its next release the experiences you see today in Collector, which is, I want to take what we call the on-demand experience, where I define the offline map area and download that map area to my device. And they're adding the pre-planned experience as well. And they're doing that because within our framework for building applications, we've built it already for Collector, and they can just take it and reuse it. So we have this shared components that we're using at the application tier for the user experience of that. Survey 123 is completely different than the native runtime applications that I've just been talking about. They actually just write directly to a SQLite data store using the REST API today. So that's storing the edits that are made on the device, or if you're pulling data from a service, it's just storing those features directly into the device. It's not creating what we call the mobile geodatabase, because actually Survey 123 is not using the runtime at all today. It's built off of Qt, which is the same developer language as App Studio, but it's not using the runtime yet. They are looking to use the runtime, but I'm not sure if they're going to include support for the mobile geodatabase the way that the other applications have been using the runtimes to do that. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I'll add something quickly. But so if you think about the older versions of Collector, a lot of that was app code in terms of how we did the offline work. The next generation of Collector, on iOS, uses the SDK directly. So there's no special sauce that we're doing that you can't do. So we're calling the exact same methods that are available to you for our own offline work.
Oh, you had a question up in the front?
Yeah, so when I'm working online and Verizon goes down or something goes down, it seems like I'm dead in the water at that point. I can't collect. Do you
Yeah, that's a great request. The question there was if I'm using a map in a connected way, I haven't downloaded a map area onto my device, and I lose connectivity, I'm basically dead in the water. You're dead in the water in the context of if I've started a collection, I can't submit the feature and have it upload that new feature back to the service. You can keep your edits and then wait until you've got connectivity again and hit submit and you're fine. But you are dead in the water if you want to capture any more features, right? So that is something that we've talked about. We don't have a release plan or development plan to address it yet, though. But I love that you asked that question because I harass our team about that one all the time.
Well, it happened.
Yeah.
We're on a boat and we're collecting data, it goes down, and we're done.
Yeah.
So we have to go back and then schedule another trip.
Yeah.
Costly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you know, especially for cases where you do know that you are going to be in a position where it is going to be expensive to get back out there, it's worth the time to prepare with an offline map. So you don't have to kind of, you know, you're not hoping that that doesn't go down either. Because in that case, you really want, you know, you don't want to just necessarily always just collect features. You need that base map. That's going to give you the best experience, even if you do lose connectivity.
Yeah. And something to think about, yeah, I mean, this isn't the answer you're looking for, but something to think about there, because we've talked to some customers that have done this, is that they'll just take the world scale offline on the map. And because they don't care about the map ultimately. And then you've got this massive extent, because you might be going into an area where you can't cache the base map down to the level that you think you might probably need for it. So if you don't care about that base map, then just take, you know, a base level. Maybe it's even a vector tile that you want to take offline. You can create a VTPK. So you've got some level of a base map, because we do require there's a base map of some kind. Take that level of it, and then just you can continue collecting. But we do require that there be that SQLite database, that mobile geodatabase on the device when you go to collect.
It's the thing, I would think you would cache that information. You know, even though it goes down, you would think the map would cache somewhere on the device. And why can't you just utilize that cache image even though you go outside of that image?
Yeah, we do cache just the graphics and the information you've collected about that feature as you're in the feature, but we're not storing it inside of a data store that can be transactional, right? And that's some development work we would need out of our runtime to truly support that. Because what happens if you forgot to add one of the attribute values, or maybe the point shifted a little bit and you want to move the geometry? We really want that transactional database underneath it. It's something we have talked about. There's just no development plan for it yet. I think we're perhaps over time. We'll take one more question though.
Quick one then. At the beginning of the presentation, you were doing predefined work area offline maps. Was that stored within the organization's online then?
So the question was, when you were creating pre-planned offline areas, where is that stored? So those pre-planned areas are stored, referenced in the web map, and they're basically stored as items. So they are stored in your ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7 instance. So the other thing just to note about the pre-planned offline areas is that you not only is make life simpler for the folks in the field, because it's easier to figure out what area to take offline, because each of those pre-planned areas is only generated once, because you, as the administrator, generated that. You don't have, if you have a large mobile workforce that comes in at 8 a.m. every morning and says, I'm going to go download on Monday morning, the server's not doing very much work there. So if you're running your own on-prem infrastructure, it's much lighter weight to use pre-plan versus the on-demand workflow.
Well, thank you for coming today. Please fill out the survey. If you didn't like this session, this was the Explorer session, and my name is Brent Pierce, so please say nasty things about Brent Pierce. He just happens to be in the room. I thought I'd call him up. Thank you.